of our flavors of, leaning into the light, right? Is that look at the lessons, look at the failure modes, look at the stories, tell yourself, we're always telling ourselves stories. That's one of the reasons that Wonder Tour works for me, to help me think about how to navigate my life, how to think about how to navigate leadership challenges, is because I frame things in terms of stories. Like it's easy to imagine myself as a character. It's easy to imagine myself as in some crazy exaggerated version of my reality. Fortunately, I've never been in Mordor when the mountain blows up and I've had to flee from the orcs. Like my life experience has not been that dramatic, right? But I have absolutely been in the Galadriel frame of mind where I desperately needed an ally and where nobody was helping me solve the problem that I wanted to solve, and I was a little bit vulnerable to poor advice, right? Or to seeing people from the way that I wanted them to be. I've definitely, super definitely been Celebrimbor, where I was so excited about making some technology thing that I wasn't super focused on the context or the impact or the ways that it could possibly go wrong. Right. I recognize that in myself. So one version of leaning into the light is is trying to see reality, trying to see what's going on around you. This is a lesson in a lot of, in a lot of mythologies and a lot of spiritual practices, right? Is that kind of casting off the illusions and trying to just see through what you want to see in the world to what's actually happening in the world.
It's very effective.
It's very effective. It's
when
really hard.
We can pull it off. Yeah, exactly.
It's really hard. It's really hard, right? We want to tell ourselves the story. The failure mode of I really like stories is that I'm always crafting things into the story that I want to see, right? And so letting go of that a little bit and like, oh yeah, I was wrong that other time. I might be wrong this time. Let me just question it a little bit. Let me take a step back. Let me look at it from a different angle. Let me ask for a second opinion. Let me listen to people that are trying to give me advice. Like we see all those examples too, where Galadriel could have been maybe a little more focused on the light, right? She was right about the risks. She's right about the danger, but she may not have been right about the correct way to solve it was, by battering it with swords.
Yeah, and who do we see who probably is the best example of sticking close to the light? Our Obi-Wan character in the entire Lord of the Rings series, Elrond.
Right.
He is consistently questioning what is reality, making sure that he's staying as close to the light of the Valar as possible. He's ever vigilant for the return of evil. He is not going to even let his relationship with others, with Galadriel or Gil-galad or anybody, get in the way of the overall mission. He just continuously centers himself. And that doesn't mean he's always right, because he is wrong in a way about the rings. He's right to be skeptical, but he ends up realizing the error of his ways when he sees the true reality, right? He sees that the elves are in a dire spot and the rings actually were a gift from the Valar to protect them in this moment. That these rings are not corrupted and they can be leveraged. And that's the founding of Rivendell that we see at the end of episode 8, which is super, super cool. And obviously also he saves Galadriel with that wisdom.
Right. Well, so yeah, that's a good way. We hadn't said this out loud, I think, when we talked in the pre-show, but the Elrond is the counterexample of leadership styles to Sauron, not because he's so different. He actually is really similar in that he makes really genuine connections with his friends, with Durin, with Galadriel. With Celebrimbor. Like he makes genuine connections with people. He's very sensitive to supporting them in their goals. Like those things he actually has in common with Sauron. The thing that's different is that he doesn't encourage them to lean into their worst impulses. And he's willing to change his opinions. He's willing to change his goals on the medium level to achieve the kind of higher level flourishing for all. Where Sauron is never going to abandon oh, you're right, Galadriel, we should wipe out the orcs. Like he's never going to abandon his long-term goals in favor of I was mistaken, and Galadriel, you've got a good point. Elrond's willing to learn from his mistakes. He's willing to learn from new information. He's willing to adapt his behaviors, but he still has this encouraging flourishing in his friends and more broadly in the world is his sort of unswerving dedication. And so, yeah, the way it's presented in this series, he's very much the counter example of leadership to Sauron, where the reason that Sauron is effective is when he's like Elrond, And the reason that we don't want to be Sauron is when he's not like Elrond.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to nerd out a little bit about this because Tolkien makes this so complex, and it's why it's one of the great universes ever created. But there's not one chosen one. This isn't as simple as Star Wars. Star Wars was meant to be simple. This is
Right.
not meant to be simple. This is meant to be this long running universe of many stories that, through repetition and variation, teach us, through myths, basically, truths about the universe. And it's brilliant in that way. And so, just for those who are tuning into the Rings of Power but aren't super huge Lord of the Rings nerds and can nerd out a little bit, I mean, Elrond is kind of like this royal bloodline of people in this universe. Like, he is a child of Elwing, who Elwing is a child of Beren and Luthien, which is one of the great stories in the Silmarillion. But either way, he's kind of like a mix of high elf bloodline with the high man bloodline with the Maya, which is like what Sauron is, a lower god bloodline as well. And so with Luthien, so he's kind of this like blending of the best of all of the different races in this world. And so it makes sense that Elrond kind of carries some of the wisdom of each race. And he is in a way, he is very much the fulfillment of the intent of Iluvatar's wisdom in the world. He acts like Iluvatar's point in creating these beings is that they would act wisely. You know, like we talk about on Lead Wisely, he wants them to lead wisely in creating this world. And Elrond is kind of the embodiment of that. And it's cool that you recognize that he's the inverse of Sauron in that way. Sauron has the skills that were given to him also when he was created by Iluvatar, but he has allowed them to be twisted.
Right. You know, that's we talk a lot about the heroic characters, the magnanimous leaders in a lot of the stories that we like. A lot of these movies we watch we call them the interlopers, the people that cross between worlds, that can carry messages between worlds, that can interpret the world in different viewpoints and help people reframe themselves. And Elrond is very much that, right? He's the one that we see as the emissary to the dwarves, and he's not just like trying to convince them to do something for his own reasons. He's like genuinely friends with Durin and genuinely wants the best for his friend, right? And just he's trying to find the synergy, as in the business term, right? Like, he's trying to find the thing that will benefit both. But he's very much the interloper character. He's always carrying messages between people. He's always the diplomat. He's always like trying to figure out how to negotiate things. And so that alternate view of leading with influence is displayed really well with Elrond, where Sauron's view of leading with influence is for his own purposes, encouraging the worst behaviors, the worst attributes of others. And Elrond is leading with influence, encouraging the best attributes of others, but also trying to lean into, their future benefits, to creating a better future that is more inclusive. I think you're right. This is a story this is not a story about simplicity. This is a story about complexity. It's a story about not just good versus evil, and not that order is necessarily correct or disorder is necessarily evil, but that there's the tension between the two of those, and navigating those with sympathy is the magnanimous leader that we see. And we see a lot of the other leaders struggling with this. The Queen of the Númenóreans is pretty skillful. She's very sympathetic. She's got people's best interests at heart. The King of the Elves, on and off, right? He's very this is the way we do things around here, right? And so he's not terribly sympathetic to the people around him, right? It takes a lot for him to get off a top dead center. So, but Elrond is, even when he's self-doubting, is walking that line very skillfully.
Yeah, he's the best of the people that we come across, and he would be the magnanimous leader. I suspect, Brian, we're going to need to do a whole nother episode on Elrond, or series of episodes on Elrond, now that we've had this conversation.
Yes, I think season 3, he's obviously breaking out, so we'll come back to that one.